Somewhere in the forests of southwestern Poland, according to a legend that refuses to die, sits an armored train packed with 300 tons of gold, gems, and stolen art, sealed inside a mountain since the last days of World War II. Historians say it's almost certainly a myth. And yet, in the summer of 2025, a team of searchers was granted permission by Polish authorities to dig for it. Again. Let's start with what actually happened, because the real history here is stranger than most of the fiction built on top of it. In 1943, deep in a range called the Owl Mountains, the Nazis launched a construction project so secretive that even now, more than 80 years later, nobody fully understands what it was for. They called it Project Ries, German for giant. Using forced labor from concentration camp prisoners, the regime carved a network of tunnels and underground chambers into solid granite, designed to withstand aerial bombardment. Some estimates suggest over 5,000 laborers worked on it, many of whom did not survive. To this day, historians debate whether Ries was meant to be a weapons research facility, an underground headquarters, or something else entirely. The project was never finished. The Germans abandoned it as the Soviet army closed in from the east. That unfinished, half-buried complex is the physical anchor for everything that follows. Nearby sits Kasia's Castle, a fortress with roots stretching back to the 1200s, seized by the Nazis in 1944 after its owner fled to England. Kasia's became the administrative heart of Project Ries. And it's here, in the tunnels beneath and around this castle, that the legend of the gold train was born. The story goes like this. In the final weeks of the war, as the Red Army advanced through Silesia, an armored train left the city of Breslau, now Wrocław, loaded with looted valuables, gold bars, gemstones, weapons, and priceless artwork stripped from museums and private collections across occupied Europe. The train was supposedly headed toward the town of Waldenburg, now called Wałbrzych. It never arrived. According to the legend, it vanished into one of the sealed tunnels of Project Ries, entombed there deliberately by retreating German forces who intended to come back for it later. They never did. For decades, this stayed a local rumor, the kind of story miners and townspeople told each other in Wałbrzych, a region that had been German for centuries before the post-war border shift handed it to Poland. Some residents even claimed their parents or grandparents had watched German soldiers moving crates into the mountainside in the final days of the war. It's worth understanding why this legend took root so easily. The Nazi looting operation was not folklore, it was one of the largest organized thefts in history. A unit called the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg systematically stripped occupied Europe of cultural treasures, tens of thousands of items from Jewish families alone, along with the contents of national museums, churches, and private galleries. Millions of tons of stolen goods moved across Europe by rail and by ship during the war. Much of it was earmarked for Hitler's planned museum in Linz, or funneled to top Nazi officials like Hermann Göring. As Germany collapsed, huge quantities of this loot were stashed in mines, castles, and tunnels, a desperate, chaotic attempt to hide what could not be shipped home. So when people in Wałbrzych said a hidden train full of treasure sounded plausible, they weren't inventing the concept out of nothing. They were pointing at a real, documented pattern and asking, what if it happened here too? The legend simmered quietly for 70 years. Then, in August 2015, it exploded into an international story. Two treasure hunters, a Pole named Peter Koper and a German named Andreas Richter, held a press conference and announced they had located the train using ground-penetrating radar. They said the readings showed a buried structure roughly 98 meters long, sitting 8 to 9 meters underground between Wałbrzych and Wrocław. A Polish deputy culture minister publicly backed the claim, telling reporters the discovery was, in 99%, confirmed. That single statement from a government official was enough to set off a media frenzy. Within weeks, the area was swarmed. Treasure hunters from across Europe descended on the site with metal detectors and shovels. Polish authorities had to cordon off the woodland and deploy soldiers, not just to guard the supposed discovery, but because the region is still littered with unexploded ordnance and booby traps from the war. When excavation finally began in 2016, after the site was cleared and declared safe, diggers found railway track fragments, scattered rocks, and a horseshoe. No train. No gold. That might have ended it. It didn't. In 2021, Koper resurfaced with a new claim, this time suggesting the train might actually be at the bottom of a lake near the village of WWII, discovered using sonar, an underwater drone, and a magnetometer. A diver was brought in to investigate the strongest signal. What he found was the remains of an old lime kiln. He said finding an actual train there was, in his own words, unlikely. Then, in 2025, an entirely different anonymous group calling itself Gold Train 2025 emerged, insisting they had no connection to Koper and Richter's earlier search and that their findings were, in their words, fundamentally different. They claimed to have pinpointed the location of 3 buried freight cars inside a sealed railway tunnel in the Swidnica Forest District. Polish forestry authorities granted them limited permission to search the surface with metal detectors and to dig no deeper than 50 centimeters by hand. A Polish historian consulted on the case, Łukasz Orlicki, was blunt about the odds. He said there is still no credible documentary evidence the train ever existed, and that shallow digging was unlikely to prove or disprove anything either way. So why has this story survived for 80 years, resisted by professional historians at every turn, and still managed to mobilize treasure hunters, journalists, and government officials generation after generation? Part of the answer is geography. The Owl Mountains are genuinely riddled with unexplored tunnels from Project WWII, many of which remain sealed or partially collapsed to this day. Nobody has ever produced a complete map of what the Nazis actually built down there. That real, physical uncertainty gives the legend somewhere to live. It's not being invented in a vacuum. It's nesting inside an actual unsolved engineering mystery. Part of the answer is precedent. The Nazis really did loot an almost unimaginable volume of wealth, and quantities of it really have turned up decades later, hidden behind false walls, buried in gardens, tucked inside innocuous-looking buildings. Koper himself, during his years of searching, once discovered a set of 16th-century Renaissance portraits hidden behind a plastered wall in a Polish village. Stories like that keep the door open. If some loot really was hidden and later found, why not this? And part of the answer, frankly, is money. The legend has been extraordinarily good for Wałbrzych. A former mining town that lost its economic base when the coal industry collapsed in the 1990s found itself transformed into a tourist destination almost overnight because of this story. Local guides now lead visitors through Project WWII's tunnels. A replica of the gold train was even built as a local attraction. One historian described the legend as the region's own Loch Ness monster, endlessly discussed, financially valuable, and never actually seen. Historians remain, as a group, deeply skeptical. There is no wartime document, no eyewitness testimony that has held up to scrutiny, no shipping manifest, nothing beyond second-hand stories passed down for decades. Most researchers who study Nazi looting operations believe the Wałbrzych gold train, as popularly described, never existed at all, that it's a post-war folk story that absorbed real historical anxieties about lost treasure and gave them a single, dramatic shape. But here's what makes this different from an ordinary debunked legend: the search has never actually stopped. Not in the 1970s. Not in 2015. Not in 2025. Every few years, someone with new equipment and a new theory gets permission to dig again, and for a little while, an entire country pays attention. Maybe that's the real story here. Not a hidden train, but the sheer staying power of an idea. The possibility that somewhere beneath a quiet Polish forest, something enormous is still waiting to be found. Whether or not the gold is real, the myth has already proven to be one of the most valuable things that ever came out of those mountains.